Chapter 1: Silent Whispers of Love. 2 years had passed since Riya's life shattered in a single, cruel moment. The memory of her termination still haunted her, the hollowed eyes of the people she had once trusted, the cold indifference of the management, and Samir, the man she had once believed would stand by her, watching as her world collapsed. She had always admired Samir, the young, brilliant director who brought out the best in her. He was more than a mentor. He was a beacon of hope in a world so often filled with shadows. But then, everything had changed. Samir hadn't reached out. He hadn't fought for her, at least, not in the way she had hoped. And as days turned to months, Riya convinced herself that he had moved on, left her behind to drown in the wreckage of their unspoken love. She thought of him less and less, but every now and then, in the quiet of her nights, his face would drift into her thoughts, his warm eyes and the gentle way he used to smile at her. She wondered if he ever thought of her. Across the city, Samir sat alone in his lavish office, a place once filled with promise but now steeped in regret. Every corner of the room reminded him of Riya, her laughter that once echoed through the halls, her relentless passion for her work, her ability to see through the walls he had built around his heart. But Samir had failed her, and no matter how much he tried to justify it, the weight of his guilt crushed him a little more each day. He had tried to fight for her. He had stood in that fateful board meeting, defending her with every ounce of authority he could muster. "You're making a mistake," he had said, his voice trembling with frustration. "Riya is the best manager we've ever had. You're throwing away someone irreplaceable." But his words had meant nothing. The management, controlled by his stepfather, had decided Riya was a threat, a woman who had uncovered their fraud and had to be silenced at any cost. They had not only taken her job, they had taken her future, her name, and worst of all, they had taken her from him. Every night, Samir would sit by the window of his towering office, staring out at the city below. He thought about Riya, about how different life would have been if he had fought harder, if he had ignored his stepfather's cruel warnings to stay away from her. His stepfather had forbidden him from seeing or speaking to her, weaving a narrative that Riya had been nothing more than a manipulative gold digger, hungry for Samir's fortune. "She was using you, Samir," he had said, his voice filled with venom. "If you want to protect this family, you'll stay far away from her." Samir knew better. Riya wasn't like that. But his hands had been tied. The threats were real. If he had reached out to her, the full force of his stepfather's power would have crashed down on her life, destroying her completely. And so, he stayed silent, watching from the shadows, unable to protect the woman he loved from the monsters lurking within his own home. He wrote messages to Riya, long, heartfelt confessions that he never sent. Every unsent message felt like a part of him dying, but he couldn't bring himself to hit send. How could he drag her back into the nightmare that was his life? "I'm sorry," he would write. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the man you needed. I'm sorry for not fighting hard enough. I'm sorry for letting them take you away." But the messages would remain unsent, locked away in the drafts of his phone, where his love for her lived, silenced, suffocated. Riya, too, had struggled in silence. Alone in her small apartment, she replayed their moments together, wondering why Samir hadn't fought for her, why he hadn't reached out. Had she been wrong about him? Had their connection meant so little to him? She cried for the life they never had, for the love that had slipped through her fingers like sand. She had always believed Samir was different, that he had seen her for who she truly was. But now, she wasn't so sure. In the quiet, she whispered his name, hoping that somewhere, somehow, he could hear her. Samir could hear her. He felt her absence every day, like a dull ache in his chest. The office felt empty without her, the light that she brought into his life gone, leaving only shadows in its place. He knew she thought he had given up on her, and that knowledge tore him apart. He had failed her in the worst way, but it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he cared too much. He stayed away to protect her from the darkness that surrounded him, the lies, the fraud, the betrayal. He couldn't drag her into that, not after everything she had already lost. But with each passing day, Samir's guilt grew heavier. He had let the people around him, the ones who should have been his allies, destroy the one person who had ever truly mattered to him. His stepfather's machinations had framed him in a series of fraudulent schemes, and now Samir faced the very real possibility of going to prison for crimes he hadn't committed. Time was running out, and with it, his hope of ever finding peace with Riya. Late one night, Samir stood by the window, the city lights flickering below, reminding him of Riya's radiant smile. Tears blurred his vision as he thought of all the words he had never said, the love he had never fully expressed. He whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry, Riya. I'm so sorry." His voice cracked with the weight of everything he had kept hidden. He wanted nothing more than to see her again, to tell her that he loved her, that he had never stopped loving her. But as the shadows closed in around him, Samir knew that love, real love, wasn't about holding on. Sometimes, it was about letting go. He would fight for her, but maybe the greatest act of love he could ever give her was to let her live a life free of the darkness that had consumed his. And so, with tears streaming down his face, Samir vowed to protect her the only way he knew how, by staying away. He whispered into the night, hoping she could somehow hear the words he had never said, "I love you, Riya. I always have. And I always will." But Riya was already gone, and Samir's tears fell into the silence, unanswered, unheard. Do you think Samir will ever gather the courage to reach out to Riya? What would happen if Riya found out about the unsent messages? Can Samir truly protect Riya by staying away, or will this only deepen the distance between them? Will Samir's stepfather's schemes come to light, or will Samir continue to face the blame for the crimes he didn't commit? How do you think Riya will move forward now that she believes Samir has abandoned her? What should Samir do next? Fight for Riya, or let her go for good? Could Samir and Riya's love survive the secrets and betrayals surrounding them? What twists do you think lie ahead for Samir in his battle against the powerful forces keeping them apart? Is it too late for Samir to make things right with Riya? What would you do if you were in Riya's shoes? Would you try to reach out to Samir, or move on? What do you think? See you again with Chapter 2, Silent Whispers of Love.